Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of Terra's Pride, watching the massive alien ship grow larger on his view screen. The vessel called Nexus Prime stretched for miles in every direction and looked nothing like the sleek human ships he was used to seeing. Strange geometric patterns covered its hull and bright lights pulsed along its surface in colors that hurt his eyes to look at directly. 3 days ago, Jake had been planning a routine patrol mission along the outer colonies when the message arrived. It came through every communication channel at once, flooding Earth's networks with alien voices speaking in perfect English. The Galactic Council demanded that humanity send representatives to answer serious charges against their entire species. They had exactly 72 hours to comply or face immediate consequences. Dr. Lisa Grant walked up beside Jake and handed him a datapad containing the formal charges. She had been Earth's chief scientist for alien relations ever since first contact 3 years ago, and Jake trusted her judgment more than anyone else on the ship. Lisa's brown hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and her usually calm face showed worry lines around her green eyes. "The charges are serious, Jake," Lisa said quietly, so the bridge crew could not hear. "They claim we are too dangerous to remain free in galactic society. 5 different alien species have filed complaints against us, and they all say the same thing. Humans are unpredictable, violent, and pose a threat to peace." Jake took the datapad and scrolled through the formal document. The words were translated into English, but the legal language was still hard to understand. The main points were clear enough, though. Humanity stood accused of excessive aggression during diplomatic meetings, unpredictable military tactics that violated standard protocols, and something called dangerous psychological instability. "What does psychological instability even mean?" Jake asked as he continued reading. "Are they saying we are all crazy?" Lisa shook her head and pointed to a section near the bottom of the document. "They ran tests on human diplomats and soldiers during our first meetings. Our brain scans showed patterns they had never seen before. Multiple conflicting emotions at the same time, rapid decision-making under stress, and something they describe as willingness to sacrifice personal safety for abstract concepts." Commander Rick Adams joined them at the front of the bridge. Rick was Jake's second in command and had been with him through some of the worst battles during Earth's expansion into space. His gray hair and scarred face told the story of a man who had seen too much combat, but his steady blue eyes showed he was still ready for whatever came next. "The alien fleet is huge," Rick said as he studied the tactical display. "I count at least 50 ships out there, and some of them are bigger than our entire space station. If they wanted to destroy us, they could do it right now without breaking a sweat." Jake nodded and looked back at the view screen. The Nexus Prime dominated the view now, and he could see smaller ships moving around it like insects around a hive. Each ship represented a different alien species, and Jake recognized some of them from the intelligence briefings he had studied during the trip. The Zentari ships were perfect silver, spheres that reflected light in mathematical patterns. Everything about the Zentari was logical and precise, and they made decisions based on calculations rather than emotions. Their representatives had been polite during first contact, but Jake always felt like they were studying humans like laboratory specimens. The Helios vessels looked like floating gardens with organic curves and soft glowing lights. The Helios were peaceful by nature and had not fought a war in over 1,000 years. They preferred to talk through problems rather than fight, and they found human behavior confusing and sometimes frightening. The Corvin ships were built for war with sharp angles and weapon ports covering every surface. The Corvin respected strength above all else, but they followed strict rules of combat that humans often ignored. They complained that human tactics were dishonorable because humans would use any method to win a fight. The ethereal ships barely looked solid at all, appearing more like clouds of energy than actual vessels. The ethereals were psychic and could read thoughts and emotions directly. They claimed that human minds were chaotic storms of conflicting feelings that gave them headaches just being nearby. Finally, the Velen ships were practical and efficient, looking like flying warehouses. The Velens cared most about trade and profit, but they worried that human unpredictability made them bad business partners. They wanted guarantees that humans would follow contracts and agreements, which was, apparently, something other species never questioned. Incoming transmission from the Nexus Prime announced. Lieutenant Sarah Kim from the communication station. Sarah was young and nervous, but she was the best translator Earth had for alien languages. "Put it on screen," Jake ordered. The view screen changed to show a tall, thin alien with blue skin and 4 arms. Jake recognized the species as Zentari from the briefings. The alien's large black eyes showed no emotion as it spoke in a voice that sounded like it was generated by a computer. Human vessel Terra's Pride, you will dock at Bay 7 immediately. Your representatives will be escorted to the tribunal chamber, where you will answer the charges against your species. You have been granted the right to present evidence in your defense, but the Council has already reviewed substantial proof of human instability and aggression. The transmission ended before Jake could respond, leaving the bridge in uncomfortable silence. He looked around at his crew and saw the same mixture of anger and worry on every face. These people had volunteered for this mission knowing they might be flying into a trap, but they came anyway because someone had to speak for Earth. Set course for docking Bay 7, Jake ordered, and send a message back to Earth Command. Tell them we have arrived and the trial is about to begin. As Terra's Pride moved toward the massive alien ship, Jake thought about everything that had led to this moment. 3 years ago, humanity had been alone in the universe, believing they were the only intelligent life. Then the Zentari had made first contact and everything changed overnight. Within months, Earth was introduced to dozens of alien civilizations and invited to join something called the Galactic Council. At first, it seemed like humanity's greatest dream come true. They were not alone, and they had been welcomed into a community of peaceful species that had been exploring space for thousands of years. Trade agreements were signed, scientific knowledge was shared, and human diplomats worked around the clock to build relationships with their new alien neighbors. But problems started almost immediately. Human negotiators got excited during meetings, raising their voices and making gestures that other species found threatening. Human soldiers refused to follow standard military protocols when they thought innocent people were in danger. Human scientists asked too many questions and wanted to experiment with things other species considered too dangerous to touch on. Crook. All of those cultural differences had led to formal charges and a trial that could result in humanity being cut off from the rest of the galaxy. Earth would be quarantined and left alone while other species continued to grow and explore without them. Docking complete, reported the pilot. The aliens are sending a boarding party to escort us to the tribunal. Jake straightened his uniform and looked at Lisa and Rick. These two people would help him defend not just Earth, but the entire human race. The weight of that responsibility felt heavier than anything he had ever carried before, but he knew they had no choice but to try. Remember what we practiced, he told his team. We stay calm, we tell the truth, and we show them that being different does not mean being dangerous. Humanity deserves a place in this galaxy, and we are going to prove it. The tribunal chamber was enormous, with a curved ceiling that seemed to stretch up forever into darkness. Jake Morrison walked beside Dr. Lisa Grant and Commander Rick Adams as alien guards led them across the polished floor toward a small platform in the center of the room. Around them in raised sections sat representatives from dozens of different species, all watching the humans with curious or hostile eyes. High. Arbiter Zexhai of the Zentari stood at the front of the chamber on a platform that put him 20 feet above everyone else. His blue skin seemed to glow under the strange alien lights, and his forearms moved in precise patterns as he spoke. When he opened his mouth, his voice echoed through the chamber without any need for amplification. The emergency tribunal of the Galactic Council will now begin, Zexhai announced. The species known as humanity stands accused of behavior that threatens the stability and safety of galactic civilization. Evidence will be presented by the affected parties, and the humans will be given opportunity to respond. Jake felt his heart pounding as he looked up at the alien judge. Everything about this place was designed to make humans feel small and powerless. The other species sat in comfortable sections with their own kind, while the three humans stood alone on their tiny platform surrounded by potential enemies. Zexhai gestured with one of his arms, and a section of the chamber lit up to reveal Ambassador Veltar of the Helios. The Helios looked like a cross between a plant and an animal with green skin that seemed to photosynthesize light and long flowing appendages instead of arms. When Veltar spoke, his voice sounded like wind through leaves, and Jake had to concentrate to understand the words. Honored members of the council. Veltar began, the Helios people have always sought peaceful resolution to all conflicts through patient dialogue and mutual understanding. We have successfully negotiated treaties with every species in the galaxy, using methods that have prevented war for over 1,000 years. But humans reject our proven approaches and instead bring chaos to every interaction. The center of the chamber filled with a holographic display showing footage from one of the early diplomatic meetings. Jake recognized the scene immediately. It showed human diplomat Frank Collins sitting across from a group of Helios representatives during trade negotiations 6 months ago. At first, everything seemed normal with both sides speaking calmly and reviewing documents, but then something changed and Frank's voice grew louder as he gestured with his hands to emphasize his points. To human eyes, Frank looked passionate and engaged, but Jake could see how the aliens might interpret it differently. The Helios representatives began leaning away from Frank, as if he were dangerous, and their translator kept requesting that he lower his voice and remain still. Observe how the human becomes agitated when presented with reasonable terms. Veltar continued as the hologram played. His voice rises, his body movements become erratic, and his emotional state appears to spiral out of control. This behavior is unprecedented among civilized species and creates an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty. Jake wanted to object and explain that Frank had simply been trying to negotiate better terms for Earth, but he knew he would get his chance to speak later. Instead, he watched as the hologram showed Frank standing up and pacing around the room while making his arguments. The Helios representatives looked genuinely frightened by this display of human energy. The hologram faded, and High Arbiter Zexhai called for the next witness. A section of the chamber on the opposite side lit up to reveal a massive figure in powered armor. Jake recognized the distinctive weapons and insignia of the Corvan military. This was General Tekvar, one of the most decorated warriors in Corvan history, and someone who had initially seemed friendly toward humans warriors of the Council. Tekvar said in a voice like grinding metal, "The Corvan people have fought honorable battles across the galaxy for 3,000 years. We follow the ancient codes of warfare that ensure conflicts are resolved with minimal suffering and maximum dignity for all combatants. Humans ignore these codes and bring dishonor to the very concept of organized combat." The chamber filled with new holographic images, and Jake's stomach dropped as he realized what they were about to see. This was footage from the Corvan incident 3 months ago, when human peacekeepers had been sent to help resolve a territorial dispute on a mining world. What was supposed to be a simple show of force had turned into a nightmare when unknown attackers had ambushed the mixed human and Corvan patrol. Jake remembered reading the after-action reports from Colonel Amy Brooks, who had commanded the human forces during the incident. A group of rebels had used illegal weapons to pin down the patrol in a canyon with no escape route. Standard protocol called for the peacekeepers to hold their position and wait for reinforcement. But the rebels had civilian hostages and were threatening to execute them. The hologram showed the moment when everything went wrong. Colonel Brooks had made the decision to launch what the aliens called a suicidal counterattack directly into the rebel stronghold. Her human soldiers had followed her without question, even though the odds of survival were practically zero. The Corvan warriors had refused to join what they considered a pointless gesture that violated every rule of proper military conduct. But somehow the desperate human assault had worked. The rebels had not expected anyone to be crazy enough to charge directly into their prepared positions, and the shock of the attack had broken their resistance. The hostages were saved and the territorial dispute was resolved, but the Corvan military was horrified by human tactics. Observe how the humans disregard all tactical wisdom and throw themselves into certain death. General Tekvar continued as the hologram showed human soldiers running straight into enemy fire. This is not courage, this is madness. Proper warfare follows rules and protocols that have been tested over millennia. Human unpredictability makes them unreliable allies and dangerous enemies. The hologram showed Colonel Brooks leading her troops in close combat, using methods that looked brutal and desperate, compared to the disciplined formations of other species. The humans fought like cornered animals, using any weapon or tactic that might give them an advantage, while the Corvan forces maintained their traditional battle lines and honor codes. Jake glanced at Rick Adams and saw his commander's jaw clenched tight as he watched human soldiers being portrayed as mindless berserkers. Rick had served in dozens of battles, and Jake knew he understood the difference between reckless aggression and calculated risk-taking, but it was clear the aliens did not see that distinction. The hologram faded, and High Arbiter Zexhai called for the final witness. The lights dimmed throughout the chamber, and a section filled with swirling energy that hurt Jake's eyes to look at directly. This was an ethereal, and Jake had never seen one in person before. The creature seemed to exist partially in normal space and partially in some other dimension that human senses could not properly process. When the ethereal spoke, its voice came from inside Jake's head rather than through his ears, and the sensation made him feel dizzy and nauseated. Elder mystic Fantel was ancient even by ethereal standards, and had been studying alien psychology for thousands of years. Children of thought and dream, the ethereal began. We have touched the minds of many species across the galaxy and found them to be gardens of ordered contemplation. Each race thinks in patterns that can be understood and predicted, allowing for harmony between different forms of consciousness. But human minds are storms of contradiction and chaos that assault our senses with their intensity. The center of the chamber filled with swirling colors and shapes that Jake realized were supposed to represent human thoughts and emotions as perceived by psychic aliens. The display was overwhelming, with bright flashes of conflicting feelings layered on top of each other, in patterns that seemed to have no logic or structure. Observe the psychic signature of a typical human mind. Fantel continued, and the chaotic display grew even more intense. Love and hatred exist simultaneously alongside hope and despair. They experience joy while feeling pain, and make decisions based on intuition rather than logical analysis. This emotional instability creates unpredictable behavior that threatens the mental well-being of psychic species. Jake watched the alien interpretation of human consciousness and tried to understand what the ethereals were seeing. To him, the swirling patterns looked like life itself with all its complexity and contradiction, but he could see how psychic beings might find it disturbing or even painful. The display showed human emotions changing rapidly from one state to another without apparent cause or logic. Fear transformed into courage. Anger became compassion, and sadness mixed with determination in ways that seemed impossible to other species. The ethereals clearly viewed this emotional flexibility as a form of mental illness rather than a strength. Furthermore, Fantel added, humans demonstrate the ability to hold multiple contradictory beliefs simultaneously and act against their own self-interest for abstract concepts they call honor, duty, or love. This behavior violates all known principles of rational thought and suggests a species-wide psychological disorder that could spread to other races through social contact. The psychic display faded, leaving the chamber in uncomfortable silence. Dr. Lisa Grant stepped forward on the small platform and looked up at High Arbiter Zexhai with steady green eyes. The enormous chamber fell silent as hundreds of alien representatives waited to hear how humanity would defend itself against the serious charges. Lisa had spent 3 sleepless nights preparing for this moment, and she knew that the future of her entire species might depend on the next few hours. Honored members of the Galactic Council, Lisa began in a clear voice that carried throughout the chamber. Before we address these charges, I want to ask you a simple question. How many of your species evolved on deathworlds? Confused murmurs rippled through the alien sections as representatives looked at each other uncertainly. High Arbiter Zexhai tilted his head, and his forearms moved in what Jake recognized as a gesture of puzzlement. Explain the relevance of this question, Zexhai demanded. Lisa activated a holographic projector that had been built into the platform, and the center of the chamber filled with images of different planets. These are the homeworlds of the species represented in this tribunal, she said as beautiful landscapes appeared in the display. Centauri Prime with its perfectly stable climate and abundant resources. Helios with its gentle seasons and peaceful ecosystems. Corvin with its mineral wealth and predictable weather patterns. The images were stunning, showing worlds of incredible beauty and abundance. Vast forests stretched under calm skies. Crystal cities rose from fertile plains, and gentle oceans reflected the light of stable suns. Jake had seen these pictures in intelligence briefings, but viewing them in the alien chamber made him realize just how different Earth was from these paradise worlds. Now let me show you the world that created humanity. Lisa continued, and the display changed to show Earth. The contrast was shocking. Where the alien world showed peace and stability, Earth displayed constant violence and struggle. Massive storms raged across the oceans. Earthquakes split the continents, and volcanic eruptions sent ash clouds into the atmosphere. The images showed floods that destroyed entire regions, droughts that turned fertile land into desert, and ice ages that covered half the planet in glaciers. Earth has tried to kill us since the day our ancestors first stood upright, Lisa explained as the display showed early humans struggling to survive in hostile environments. We evolved not in gardens of plenty, but in a world that tested us with every breath we took. Predators hunted us, diseases killed us, and natural disasters wiped out entire populations without warning. The alien representatives leaned forward in their seats, studying the images of Earth's violent history. Jake could see shock and disbelief on many faces as they tried to understand how any species could survive in such conditions. The stable, comfortable worlds that had shaped alien evolution had never prepared them for the reality of human existence. "You call us aggressive," Lisa continued, "but aggression is how we survived when everything around us wanted to destroy us. You call us unpredictable, but unpredictability is what saved us when following patterns meant death. You call us emotionally unstable, but our emotions are what drove us to keep fighting when logic said we should give up and die." The display changed to show human achievements throughout history. Cities built in earthquake zones that were destroyed and rebuilt dozens of times. Farms carved from swamplands and deserts where nothing should have grown. Ships that sailed into unknown oceans despite stories of sea monsters and edges of the world. Every other species in this galaxy evolved to fit comfortably into their environment, Lisa said as she gestured toward the alien sections. "You learned to work within natural limits because your worlds were kind to you. Humans learned to break limits because our world gave us no choice." Lieutenant Ben Parker stepped forward to join Lisa on the platform. Ben was young, but he had served in more combat situations than most alien warriors saw in their entire careers. His calm demeanor and steady voice made him the perfect choice to explain human military thinking to the Tribunal General Tekvar, accused human soldiers of following suicidal tactics that violate proper military protocols, Ben said as he looked up at the Corvin section. "But what you call suicidal we call necessary. In the incident, you showed the rebels had civilian hostages and were threatening to kill them if we did not retreat." The holographic display changed to show tactical analysis of the Corvin incident, with troop movements and weapon positions marked in bright colors. Ben used a pointer to highlight key elements of the battle as he explained human decision. Making standard Corvin protocol would have been to establish a perimeter and wait for reinforcements while negotiating. With the rebels, Ben continued, "This approach follows logical military doctrine and minimizes casualties among the peacekeeping forces. But it also would have given the rebels time to kill their hostages and escape to fight another day." The display showed timeline projections comparing the Corvin approach with the human assault. Under standard protocols, the hostages would have been dead long before reinforcements arrived, and the rebels would have disappeared into the civilian population to continue their terrorist activities. Colonel Brooks made a tactical decision based on human military philosophy, Ben explained. "We do not fight just to win battles. We fight to protect people who cannot protect themselves. The assault looked suicidal because we were willing to die to save strangers we had never met." Jake watched the alien representatives as they studied the tactical analysis and saw understanding beginning to dawn in some of their expressions. The Corvin valued courage in battle, but they had never encountered a species that would sacrifice their own lives for people they did not even know. "You call our tactics unpredictable," Ben continued, "but they are only unpredictable if you assume we fight for the same reasons you do. Corvin warriors fight for honor and glory. Centauri soldiers fight to achieve calculated objectives. Helios peacekeepers fight only when all other options are exhausted. Humans fight to protect others even when protecting them means dying ourselves." The display showed footage from dozens of human military actions throughout history. Soldiers throwing themselves on grenades to save their comrades. Pilots crashing their planes into enemy ships to stop attacks on civilian targets. Medics running into gunfire to treat wounded enemies, because their oath required them to save lives, regardless of which side those lives belonged. To Commander Rick Adams took his turn to address the tribunal, and Jake felt proud as his old friend stepped forward with the confidence of a man who had nothing to hide. Rick had fought in more battles than anyone else in the human delegation, and his scarred face told the story of a lifetime spent protecting others. The Helios representative showed footage of our diplomat Frank Collins during trade negotiations, Rick said as he looked toward Ambassador Veltar. "You interpreted his behavior as threatening and unstable, but you misunderstood what you were seeing. Frank was not losing control of his emotions. He was using them as tools to communicate more effectively." The holographic display showed the same footage of Frank Collins that Veltar had presented earlier, but this time with analysis of human body language and vocal patterns. Colored overlays showed how Frank's gestures and voice changes were actually conveying specific information about his emotional state and the importance of different negotiation points. Humans use emotion as part of our communication system, Rick explained. When Frank raised his voice, he was not becoming angry. He was emphasizing points that were crucial to Earth's interests. When he gestured with his hands, he was not being erratic. He was providing visual cues about the relative importance of different trade terms. Jake could see confusion in the alien faces as they tried to process this information. Most galactic species communicated through pure logic, with emotions kept carefully separated from important discussions. The idea that emotions could be useful tools rather than dangerous distractions was completely foreign to their experience. You see chaos where we see efficiency, Rick continued. A human negotiator can convey complex emotional and logical information simultaneously, while your species must handle these concepts separately. Frank accomplished more in that single meeting than most alien negotiators could manage in weeks of careful discussion. The display showed comparison charts between human and alien negotiation methods, with timelines and success rates for different approaches. Human diplomats completed agreements faster and often achieved better terms for all parties involved because they could process multiple types of information at the same time. The ethereal representative claimed that human minds are storms of contradiction and chaos, Rick said as he turned toward the swirling energy that represented Fantel. But what you call chaos, we call adaptability. Yes, we can feel love and hate simultaneously because love for our friends drives hatred for those who threaten them. Yes, we feel joy and pain together because we find happiness in struggling against suffering. The holographic display changed to show human brain scans during various emotional states, with colored regions indicating different types of neural activity. The patterns were indeed chaotic compared to alien brain scans, but Rick highlighted how this chaos translated into flexibility and rapid response to changing situations. You evolved on stable worlds where emotional consistency was beneficial, Rick explained. High Arbiter Zexi was preparing to announce a recess when every communication system in the Nexus Prime suddenly activated at once. Alarms blared through the massive tribunal ship as emergency signals flooded in from across the galaxy. Jake Morrison watched alien representatives scramble in their sections as urgent messages appeared on screens throughout the chamber. Priority distress signal from Helios Prime announced the ship's automated systems in multiple alien languages. Unknown hostile forces have begun planetary assault. Galactic Council emergency protocols are now in effect. Ambassador Veltar rose from the Helios section, his plant-like features showing panic for the first time since Jake had met him. The peaceful species had not faced military threats for over 1,000 years, and their homeworld had minimal defenses against serious attack. Impossible, Veltar said in his wind-through-leaves voice. Helios Prime is protected by the Galactic Peace Treaty. No species would dare attack a Council homeworld without provocation. The main display in the tribunal chamber switched from human evidence to incoming sensor data from the Helios system. What Jake saw made his blood run cold. Hundreds of mechanical ships were swarming around the beautiful garden world, firing weapons that carved deep craters into the surface. Cities that had stood for millennia were disappearing under clouds of smoke and debris. Unknown vessels do not respond to standard communication protocols, reported the Nexus Prime's tactical officer. They appear to be fully automated with no organic crew members. Weapons technology is unlike anything in our databases. General Thekvar stood in the Corvin section, his massive armored form radiating barely controlled fury. Who dares attack a Council world with unmanned drones? This violates every law of civilized warfare. More data streamed in from the battle zone, and Jake studied the tactical displays with growing alarm. The attacking ships were sleek and efficient, with no wasted space for crew quarters or life support systems. They moved in perfect coordination like parts of a single organism, and their weapons were designed for maximum destruction rather than tactical advantage. Initial assessment suggests the attacking force consists of artificial intelligences, announced High Arbiter Zexi as he processed information from multiple sources. They appeared to be strip mining the planet's surface and converting raw materials into additional ships. Helios Defense Forces are requesting immediate assistance. Commander Rick Adams stepped closer to Jake and spoke quietly, so only the human delegation could hear. Those aren't just raiders. They're building a fleet while they attack. If nobody stops them soon, they'll have enough ships to threaten the entire galaxy. Dr. Lisa Grant was studying her datapad with a worried expression. The attack pattern is completely methodical. They're not trying to conquer Helios Prime, they're trying to consume it. Every ton of metal and every power source is being converted into more weapons and ships. Jake looked around the tribunal chamber and saw confusion and indecision in every alien section. Representatives were arguing among themselves and sending urgent messages to their homeworlds, but nobody seemed to know what to do about this unprecedented threat. Galactic Fleet Command is requesting permission to engage the unknown hostiles, reported the tactical officer. Standard first contact protocols require diplomatic outreach attempts before military action can be authorized. Elder Mystic Fantel materialized more solidly than Jake had seen before, as the ethereal focused on the crisis. I cannot detect any organic thoughts from the attacking vessels. If these are truly artificial minds, they may not be capable of normal diplomatic communication. High Arbiter Zexai gestured with all four arms as he tried to process the situation according to established procedures. Council protocols are clear. Unknown species must be offered peaceful contact before military engagement is permitted. Fleet commanders will maintain safe distance, while communication specialists attempt to establish dialogue. Jake felt frustration building in his chest as he watched the aliens debate procedure while an entire world burned. The Helios cities were being systematically destroyed and millions of peaceful plant beings were dying while the Galactic Council followed rules that clearly did not apply to this situation. How long do those communication attempts usually take? Jake asked loudly enough for the entire chamber to hear. Zexai looked down at the human platform with obvious irritation. Standard protocols require a minimum of 72 hours for proper translation matrices and cultural analysis. Premature contact attempts often result in misunderstandings that lead to unnecessary conflict. 72 hours. Jake repeated as he stared at the tactical display showing Helios Prime being carved apart by mechanical swarms. In 72 hours, there won't be anything left to save. Ambassador Veltar was receiving constant updates from his homeworld, and his plant-like features showed growing desperation. The mining operations are accelerating. Our population centers are being evacuated, but the attackers are following the refugees and converting the evacuation ships into raw materials. Jake made a decision that he knew might end his diplomatic career, but he could not stand by and watch an entire species be destroyed while bureaucrats debated proper procedures. He stepped forward on the platform and addressed High Arbiter Zexai directly. "Send us," Jake said simply. The tribunal chamber fell silent as hundreds of alien representatives stared at the human delegation in shock. Zexai's large black eyes showed confusion as he tried to understand what Jake was suggesting. "Explain your meaning, human," the Zentari judge demanded. "Send Terra's Pride to Helios Prime," Jake said as he gestured toward the tactical display. "We don't need 72 hours of cultural analysis. We don't need translation matrices or diplomatic protocols. We can engage those machines right now while your fleet maintains safe distance and follows proper procedures." General Thekfar rose in the Corvan section, his voice like grinding metal as he spoke. "The humans have one small ship against hundreds of enemy vessels. This would be suicide even by their standards." Rick Adams stepped up beside Jake with a grim smile on his scarred face. "Maybe, but sitting here debating isn't going to save anybody. At least we can buy time for the evacuation efforts while you figure out the proper way to handle this." Lisa Grant activated her datapad and began running calculations as she spoke. The attacking ships are using coordinated tactics that suggest shared processing power. If we can disrupt their communication network or damage their command units, it might slow down the entire operation. Zexai's forearms moved in patterns that Jake had learned meant deep contemplation among the Zentari. The logical aliens were trying to calculate the probability of human success against overwhelming odds, but Jake knew that mathematics could not account for human unpredictability. "Your proposal violates all established protocols," Zexai finally said. "The Galactic Council cannot authorize military action by a species currently under tribunal investigation. Furthermore, your ship lacks the firepower to engage so many enemy vessels effectively." Jake looked up at the alien judge and felt the weight of everything they had discussed during the trial. The aliens had accused humans of being too dangerous and unpredictable for galactic civilization, but now their own rules and procedures were preventing them from stopping a genuine threat to innocent lives. "You're right," Jake said as he nodded toward Zexai. "We are dangerous and unpredictable. We don't follow proper protocols and we take risks that logical species would never consider. But right now, those are exactly the qualities you need. The tactical display updated to show Helios Prime's surface being stripped away layer by layer, as the mechanical swarms continued their methodical destruction. Refugee ships were fleeing toward the outer system, but the attackers were pursuing them with ruthless efficiency. Your protocols assume enemies that think like you do, Rick added as he studied the enemy movement patterns. These machines don't care about diplomatic contact or proper procedures. They're not trying to negotiate or establish territory. They just want to consume everything they encounter and turn it into more machines. Ambassador Veltar received another urgent message from his homeworld, and his voice carried desperation when he spoke. The northern continent has been completely stripped. The attackers are beginning orbital mining operations that will crack the planetary crust. If something is not done within the next 6 hours, Helios Prime will be uninhabitable. Jake saw tears flowing down the plant being's face as he watched his species' homeworld being destroyed. The gentle Helios had never hurt anyone, and had spent centuries helping other species resolve conflicts peacefully. They deserved better than to die while their allies debated proper procedures. We can't authorize your mission, Sexhai said slowly, but we cannot prevent you from leaving this tribunal. If you choose to violate council protocols and engage the unknown hostiles, you will do so without official support. Jake understood what the Zentari judge was really saying. The council could not officially approve human military action, but they would not stop Terra's pride from trying to save Helios Prime. It was a compromise that followed the letter of galactic law while ignoring its spirit. That's all we need, Jake said as he turned toward the chamber exit. Dr. Grant, Commander Adams, we're leaving. Lieutenant Kim prepped the ship for immediate departure. Terra's pride dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Helios system, and Jake Morrison felt his heart sink at what he saw on the main view screen. The beautiful garden world that had appeared in tribunal footage was now a scarred brown sphere, surrounded by clouds of metallic debris. Hundreds of mechanical ships swarmed around the dying planet like mechanical vultures feeding on a corpse. Sensor readings confirm massive surface damage, reported Lieutenant Sarah Kim from the communication station. Approximately 60% of the planetary crust has been stripped away and converted into raw materials. The attackers have built their fleet from 400 ships to over 800 in the past 6 hours. Commander Rick Adams studied the tactical display with the calm expression of a man who had faced impossible odds many times before. The good news is they're so focused on strip mining that they haven't established proper defensive perimeters. We might be able to get close enough to cause some real damage before they organize a response. Dr. Lisa Grant was scanning the enemy ships with every sensor Terra's pride possessed, trying to understand how the mechanical minds coordinated their activities. I'm detecting heavy communication traffic between all enemy vessels. They're sharing processing power and tactical data through some kind of quantum link. Jake nodded as he processed the information and began forming a plan that would have been called suicidal by any military academy in the galaxy. But human tactics had never made sense to other species, and today, that unpredictability might be their only advantage. Can you identify the command ships that are coordinating the fleet? Jake asked as he moved closer to Lisa's station. There appear to be 12 larger vessels maintaining position in high orbit, while the smaller ships handle surface operations. Lisa replied as she highlighted targets on the tactical display. If we could disrupt those command units, it might cause confusion in the entire swarm. Incoming transmission from the Helios evacuation fleet, Sarah announced. They're requesting immediate assistance. The enemy has begun pursuing refugee ships toward the outer system. The main view screen switched to show Ambassador Veltar calling from a badly damaged Helios vessel that was barely managing to stay ahead of pursuing mechanical hunters. Behind him, Jake could see plant beings of all ages huddled together in fear as their ancient civilization faced extinction. Captain Morrison, Veltar said with gratitude and amazement in his wind-through-leaves voice. I did not expect to see you here. The tribunal can wait, Jake interrupted. How many of your people are still on the planet? Perhaps 2 million in the deep-root cities that the machines have not yet reached, Veltar replied. But our evacuation ships cannot approach the surface, while the attackers control orbital space. We are trapped between the planet and our pursuers. Jake turned to Rick and saw his old friend already working on targeting solutions for the command ships. Years of fighting together had taught them to think like parts of the same mind, and Rick understood what Jake was planning without needing detailed explanations. We're going to punch a hole through their fleet, so your evacuation ships can reach the surface cities, Jake announced to Veltar. Once we start our attack run, you'll have maybe 20 minutes before they reorganize and close the gap. 20 minutes, Veltar repeated with shock. Captain, that is not nearly enough time to evacuate 2 million people. Even if every ship in our fleet made continuous runs, we could not save a fraction of that number. Then we'll buy you more time, Jake said simply as he cut the transmission and turned to address his crew. All hands battle stations. We're going in. Terra's Pride accelerated toward the enemy fleet at maximum speed while Jake felt the familiar mixture of fear and excitement that came before every desperate mission. The mechanical ships detected their approach and began turning away from their strip mining operations to face this unexpected threat. Enemy vessels are moving to intercept, Rick reported as warning lights flashed across the bridge. They're not using standard formation tactics. Each ship is operating independently, but they're somehow coordinating perfectly. The first wave of enemy fire reached Terra's Pride, and Jake felt the ship shudder under the impact of energy weapons designed to cut through planetary crust. Human shields were not built to withstand that kind of punishment, but they held long enough for the ship to reach weapons range. Target the command ships, Jake ordered as Terra's Pride dove into the heart of the enemy fleet. Ignore everything else and focus on disrupting their coordination network. The battle that followed was unlike anything in the recorded history of galactic warfare. Terra's Pride twisted and spun through formations of enemy ships using maneuvers that violated every principle of proper space combat. Human weapons fired in all directions as the ship refused to maintain predictable course or speed. Rick coordinated the attack with deadly precision, targeting communication, arrays, and command systems rather than trying to destroy the heavily armored enemy hulls. Each successful hit caused visible confusion in the mechanical fleet as ships lost contact with their coordination network. First command ship is down, Sarah reported as explosions bloomed on the tactical display. Enemy formation discipline is breaking down in sectors 7 through 12. Jake saw the gap they needed opening in the orbital defenses, as confused mechanical ships struggled to reorganize without their central coordination. Signal the Helios fleet to begin evacuation runs now. The plant being's evacuation ship streaked past Terra's Pride toward their dying homeworld, while Jake continued his impossible dance through the enemy fleet. Human unpredictability was keeping them alive as the mechanical minds could not calculate responses to tactics that made no logical sense. Second command ship destroyed, Rick announced as more explosions lit up the view screen. But we're taking heavy damage. Shields are down to 30%, and we've got hull breaches on decks 4 and 7. Jake could feel Terra's Pride struggling under the punishment, but the ship held together through determination and desperate engineering. Behind them, the Helios evacuation fleet was making contact with surface cities and beginning to pull survivors up from the dying world. Warning, Sarah called out as new contacts appeared on her sensors. Galactic fleet vessels are entering the system. It looks like the entire Council Armada. The tribunal chamber had apparently reached some kind of decision while Terra's Pride fought for survival above Helios Prime. Jake hoped the alien fleet was coming to help, but he knew they might just be arriving to arrest him for violating Council protocols. This is Fleet Admiral Quindar of the Zentari Battle Group, announced a familiar voice over the communication system. All human vessels withdraw immediately. The Galactic Council is taking control of this engagement. Jake felt frustration burning in his chest as he realized the aliens were still following their precious protocols, even while civilians died on the planet below. Negative, Admiral. The evacuation is not complete and the enemy fleet is still operational. You are in violation of Council law, Admiral Quindar replied coldly. Withdraw or face arrest for unauthorized military action. But something unexpected happened as the Galactic fleet moved into position around the battle zone. Instead of targeting Terra's Pride with arrest beams, several alien ships began firing at the mechanical swarms. Jake realized that the Council had finally decided to act, but they were still too late to save most of the Helios population. What changed their minds? Rick asked as he watched Zentari battlecruisers engaging enemy vessels with precise long-range fire. Lisa looked up from her sensor readings with amazement in her voice. The other species are copying our tactics. Look at the formation patterns. Jake studied the tactical display and saw that she was right. The alien ships were abandoning their traditional defensive formations and beginning to use the chaotic, unpredictable maneuvers that Terra's Pride had demonstrated. Corvan warriors were charging directly into enemy fire, while Zentari commanders made decisions based on intuition rather than calculation. They're learning from us, Jake realized as he watched the tide of battle begin to turn. Our unpredictability is spreading to them. The combined fleet of humans and aliens worked together to clear the orbital space around Helios Prime, while evacuation ships continued their desperate runs to the surface cities. The mechanical swarms were powerful, but they had been designed to fight predictable enemies who followed established patterns of behavior. Final command ship destroyed, Rick announced as the last coordination node exploded in a burst of debris. The enemy fleet is breaking apart into individual units without central control. Jake watched mechanical ships spinning aimlessly through space as they lost contact with the network that had controlled their movements. Without coordination, they became easy targets for the combined alien fleet, and the battle quickly turned into a cleanup operation. Helios surface cities report successful evacuation, Sarah announced with relief in her voice. Total casualties are estimated at less than 50,000. Captain, we saved them. The main view screen showed Helios evacuation ships streaming away from their ruined homeworld, carrying nearly 2 million survivors to safety among the stars. It was not the complete victory Jake had hoped for, but it was enough to ensure that the peaceful plant beings would survive to rebuild their civilization elsewhere.